the Silver Institute's numbers and how there's always a shortfall, certainly in recent years, of supply on demand. I mean, where's the difference come from? I guess that China has basically been feeding the market to try and control the price. Is that people will have to understand. I mean, put this into context, they have to understand it's not gold going up, but it's the currencies going down, in this case, the dollar. It's the currency falling in terms of its purchasing power. That is why the People's Bank of China are buying gold. It's not so much they're buying gold, they're selling dollars.
Right.
And, do they want to buy another currency? No, they don't. They don't want to buy another, they don't want to buy euros because it's exactly the same story. Or sterling or whatever, or even Japanese yen. They don't want to buy those. So where else do you go? You get out of fiat and you get into real money, which is gold. And that's what they're doing. And this is why there's so much speculation, if you like, about China's long-term intentions in terms of guaranteeing the value of the yuan. Will they go onto a gold standard? I mean, there's no doubt about it that China has been accumulating gold ever since the People's Bank of China was appointed by law back in 1983 to handle the Communist Party's acquisition of gold and silver. That was 1983. They accumulated as much as they wanted up until 2002, when obviously they decided that the state had had enough. And incidentally, they became the largest nation by gold mine output. And that was a deliberate act of policy. They also imported doré, and they're still being importing gold from outside China, in particular from our markets. In 2002, they decided that they'd got enough gold, and it was now the time for private individuals to acquire gold. Why? Well, I mean, if you go back to Marxist theory, and this is what they were teaching in all the universities in China, I mean, really from the time of Mao Zedong all the way up until fairly recently. They're probably still teaching it as far as we may know. But they've been saying that, capitalism will eventually fail. Yeah, so to get back to, I mean, as far as they're concerned, if they can see that capitalism in the West is going to fail, then obviously their fiat currencies would go with it. That's why they had a gold policy. And incidentally, it's also why they had a silver policy, which, of course, I think very, very few people really realize. I mean, it's interesting. I attended a conference in New York, which I was speaking at. That must have been about 2011, I think probably about 2013. So we're talking, a bit over 10 years ago. And there were lots and lots of silver exploration companies exhibiting at this conference. And at the time, there was a lot of, sort of conspiracy theory stuff about how J.P. Morgan were banging the market every 5 minutes, and then you had what was her name, Blythe Masters, who was head of the commodity side. She deliberately went on I think it was CNN, to, if you like, make it absolutely clear that J.P. Morgan did not take positions in the silver market. Now, of course, everybody running the conspiracy theory sort of thought, well, yeah, this woman's lying. But I can tell you, I've known people like Blythe Masters, and they are extremely careful about what they say in public. They really are. There's no way she was lying. So we know that. So going back to the conference, I asked these silver miners, I said, right, when you produce your silver output, doré, whatever, how do you turn it into cash to pay the wages and pay all the energy bills and all the rest of it? And they all said exactly the same thing. A man from Glencore comes around, he assesses the value of the doré, and then they're paid by a bank, which presumably was JP Morgan, because if we're talking about a large lot like Glencore, it's obviously JP Morgan. It's then shipped off. And I said, well, where's it shipped off to? So, well, we don't know, but I mean, presumably China, but we don't actually know for certain because it's not our business anymore. I mean, we're just paid when it leaves the site. Then if you look at the other end of it, obviously JP Morgan would also be acting for China on the futures market. So what we have, and it's quite easy to understand, what we have is we have silver in the form of Dory, but it's still silver, bypassing the market and then being hedged in the market. So that was the suppression.
Wow.
Yeah. And they were doing this. They've been doing this for ages. And bear in mind that China is something like the 5th largest producer of silver in the world itself. I mean, she produces a lot of silver. And she was importing this stuff. I mean, at the time, it sort of played into her hands because refining silver isn't a very environmentally friendly process. I think the Canadians pretty much stopped it. So, I mean, they were, the Chinese were quite happy to do it. And so they accumulated a hell of a lot of silver. And if you look at, the Silver Institute's numbers and how, there's always a shortfall, certainly in recent years, of supply on demand. I mean, where's the difference come from? I guess that China has basically been feeding the market to try and control the price. So the largest global manufacturers of photovoltaic cells. I mean, they've got every reason to have a huge stock of silver. Mm-hmm. The other thing I discovered, which was fascinating, was that China's exports in 2023 of silver, I think the figure was something like 250 million ounces. It matched pretty well exactly the Silver Institute's shortfall on its assessment. Now, the other thing that was interesting is if you look where the silver was sent, it was sent to London, it was sent to Hong Kong. I think Singapore was in there as well. Most of it going to those centers. Now, these are not large consumers of silver, but they are financial markets. So, that tells me that they were suppressing the price. We now have a situation where I just wonder whether it's in their interests anymore to continue to do that. And so far as I can see, the 2024 exports of silver have been significant, but not to financial centers. So I think there's a sort of change in China's thinking. Very, very interesting. China has accumulated huge quantities of gold. Now, if you look at Russia, apart from what the central bank's got, which I think is 2,000 tons or something, I'm told by fairly well-informed sources that there are two wealth funds. One is called the Grop Fund, believe it or not. Those two funds have got something like 10,000 tons of gold between them. That's what we're told. So they've got around about 12,000 tons of gold. Not only that, but they're accelerating their mine output. They're now, I think, joint second largest producer with Australia. The central bank holding is about 2,000 tons. There's another 10,000 held in various principally two wealth funds. Okay. But when it comes to mine output, I think we're looking at about 350 tons. So, but Russia could go onto a gold standard tomorrow. I mean, it's fascinating how the propaganda, the anti-Russia propaganda, because of the war and because of Putin and all the rest of it, is such that you get serious writers, economic commentators saying that Russia's bust. It's not. I mean, its debt to GDP is less than 20%. If you look at the tax rate for ordinary people, income tax is around about 13%. I mean, if you make a lot of money, you pay 15%. Corporation tax is about 25%, which is the same as it is in the UK, similar, I think, in America and Canada. But the inflation rate is high. Yeah, I mean, it's running at something like 8%. Now, I don't know whether that's because they actually report a proper inflation rate, which we don't. I mean, John Williams would argue that we've had 8% inflation and more for some considerable time in the United States. But the difference is that in Russia, people's wages have been rising very, very sharply. I mean, if you're employed, I think it's a reasonable level of employment, then you're getting wage rises of, sort of 20, 30%. I mean, this is against an inflation background of, around about 8%. And so what banks are doing is banks are encouraging people to save. And these guys are saving, which we don't do. They have an economy which actually could switch, very, very quickly into a gold standard. Whereas, can you imagine us doing it? No way. Krugman, as an economist, is, I'm sorry to say, I mean, he's just, in bongo land. I mean, he's just out of it. I mean, he really is. Along with Stiglitz, I mean, he was sort of saying, I think at one stage, well, certainly Stiglitz was recommending under Maduro, was it? I can't remember the previous. Was it Chavez in Venezuela? Was following the right policies. I mean, come on. So, sorry, Krugman and Stiglitz and all the rest of it. We just got to forget them. I mean, they are actually partly responsible for the trap that we've got ourselves into. I mean, and their God, for whom they are disciples, Keynes, has actually got a lot to answer for in terms of where we are, because it's really destroying the West. I mean, it really is. His policies, going back to general theory, he invented macroeconomics, which now everybody sort of thinks is a wonderful thing. They may not support Keynesianism, they may not support monetarism, but the one thing they will do is they'll say, I support macroeconomics. It's a non-science. It was invented by Keynes. I mean, this is, anyway, we're wandering off a little bit from current markets, but that is why the whole thing is now in a state of collapse. It's happening.